The distant stars had always seemed so far away to Dr. Elara Finch, a quiet reminder of a universe teeming with life she could never truly touch. But today, the call from the Alari was different. It wasn't just an ordinary signal. It was a desperate cry, a plea for help that echoed through the cosmos. Their planet, once a jewel of flourishing ecosystems and advanced technology, now lay at the brink of extinction. The disease that plagued them had proven beyond their most advanced medical understanding, and they were rapidly losing their population. Ilara's fingers hovered over the console, the sterile interface before her seemingly mocking her hesitation. It was supposed to be simple. A scientist, a healer. She had spent years on Earth fighting against outbreaks, curing diseases, saving lives. But this felt different. The Alari weren't just any species. They were elegant, otherworldly beings, proud and ancient. The very thought of her, a mere human, being their last hope, struck a chord deep in her heart. She'd always been reluctant to take on the weight of another's life, ever since the tragedy that shattered her world and left her faith in her own abilities in tatters. A soft beep pulled her from her thoughts. The message was still there, pulsating on the screen. The Alari had given up all hope of finding a cure within their own civilization, and the weight of that desperation crashed down on her. She could ignore it, continue to live in her own painful bubble of self-imposed exile, or she could answer the call. With a sharp intake of breath, Elara made her decision. Within hours, she was aboard the sleek interstellar craft, her mind racing with uncertainty. She'd heard of the Alari, a proud race whose art, technology, and culture were lauded as some of the most sophisticated in the galaxy. But she knew little of their biology, their customs, or how their society functioned. She had no idea what awaited her, or how she would even begin to help. Earth, her home, was far removed from their world. What could a human know about saving an alien race? But as the ship soared through the stars, Elara couldn't shake the feeling that this might be her last chance, her chance to redeem herself, to prove that she wasn't broken. She'd once been a brilliant healer, before everything had fallen apart. Maybe, just maybe, this would be her moment to save not just the Alari, but herself. The journey was long, and as the ship approached the Alari homeworld, a deep sense of foreboding set in. Her mind shifted between determination and dread, wondering if she was truly ready for the challenge. As the planet's blue-green surface appeared on the viewport, a wave of doubt hit her like a physical blow. The Alari were waiting, but she wasn't sure what they expected from her, or if they'd even accept her help. The shuttle descended through the planet's thinning atmosphere, and she caught her first glimpse of the Alari capital. A sprawling city of towering crystalline spires, now covered in a pall of ash and decay. The disease had claimed everything. Their streets, their people, their once vibrant culture. The sight was chilling. How could something so beautiful become so fragile? Her shuttle landed with a soft thud, and the doors hissed open. Elara took a breath, feeling the weight of it all pressing down on her. She wasn't just walking into a foreign world. She was stepping into a shattered civilization's last hope. The first Alari she met was an elder, a tall being with translucent skin that shimmered under the dim sky. His eyes were deep and ancient, and they bore into Elara with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. His name was Thal, and he was both a healer and a leader of his people. "Human," he said, his voice resonating with an almost regal authority. "We have been waiting for you, but know this, our pride has led us here. We will not surrender our way of life easily." His eyes flickered with something unreadable, as though measuring her not just with his gaze, but with some inner, intangible standard. Elara nodded, trying to steady her pulse. "I understand," she said, though part of her knew she didn't. "But your people are dying. I can help, if you'll let me." Thal didn't respond immediately, and in that silence, Elara felt the weight of their civilization pressing down on her. She had no choice now. The Alari were her responsibility, whether they wanted her help or not. Elara stood in the grand hall of the Alari Palace, surrounded by the alien leaders who regarded her with a mixture of skepticism and curiosity. Thal, the elder healer, had led her into a vast chamber, its walls lined with intricate crystalline structures that pulsed faintly, responding to the energy in the room. The soft, melodic hum of the city echoed through the floors, but it did little to ease the tension she felt. The air was thick with expectations. "We have brought you here, human," Thal began, his voice a low rumble, "not because we believe in your ability to cure us, but because we have no choice. Our planet is dying, and our healers can do nothing more." He gestured to a long line of Alari healers, their eyes filled with exhaustion, their bodies worn from months of futile effort. They were all as tall and willowy as their ancestors, with pale skin that shimmered like moonlight, but their vibrant glow had faded, faint and muted, much like the city around them. Ilara swallowed, trying not to let her unease show. She had been expecting this, but it still stung. She was the outsider, the human who might save them all, but at what cost to her pride and principles? It was difficult to fathom how a civilization so advanced in technology and culture could be brought to its knees by a simple disease. "I'm here to help," Ilara said, her voice firm. "But you need to trust me. The disease affecting your people is unlike anything I've seen. I'll need to understand everything about your biology and your environment to find a solution." The Alari leaders exchanged looks, their expressions unreadable. Thal seemed to ponder her words for a long moment before speaking again. "We trust you with the knowledge of our people," he said. "But understand this. We Alari do not surrender to outsiders. We will not be dictated to, nor will we be told how to live." His tone was resolute, even as the flicker of fear behind his eyes betrayed his words. Ilara felt the weight of his words. The Alari had a deep connection to their environment, a spiritual bond that had shaped their culture for millennia. Their technology was advanced, yes, but it was intricately tied to their belief that they must live in harmony with nature. And now their world was dying, and that same philosophy was becoming their greatest obstacle. "I don't want to impose," Ilara said, taking a deep breath. "But if you want your people to survive, you'll need to let go of some of your beliefs." She paused, looking around the room. "This disease isn't just biological. It's environmental. Your technology, your cities, they've been poisoning your planet for centuries. The cure isn't just a medicine. It's a complete overhaul of your way of life." The silence that followed her words was thick and heavy. She could see the reactions rippling through the gathered Alari. Some looked horrified, others skeptical, and a few were simply resigned. The idea of changing their way of life was unfathomable to them. For all their advances, the Alari were rooted in tradition, sacred, ancient ways that had served them well until now. One of the younger Alari, a woman with dark violet eyes, stepped forward. She was thinner than the rest, her skin almost translucent, and her hair shimmered like liquid silver. "What are you suggesting?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Ilara took a deep breath. "Your world is dying because you've overused the resources beneath your feet. Your cities were built with technology that drains the very life of the planet. You need to stop taking from your world and start restoring it." The room erupted in murmurs, some of the Alari clearly offended, others unsure. Thal raised a hand, silencing them. "We have heard these words before," he said, his gaze sharp. "Many of our ancestors warned us about the dangers of over-reliance on technology. But to abandon all that we've built, that is too great a sacrifice. We cannot, will not return to a primitive way of life." Ilara's heart sank. This was the crux of it. Their pride, their history, it had become a prison. "I'm not asking you to give up everything," Ilara said, trying to maintain her composure. "But the disease won't stop until your planet is restored. It's in the air, the water, the soil. It's all interconnected. Your technology, your society, it's poisoning everything." Thal's eyes narrowed, and Ilara could feel the weight of his gaze on her, testing her resolve. The room was still, the only sound the soft hum of the city's energy grid. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Thal spoke. "We will consider your words, human, but we will not be rushed. Our people need time to think, to discuss." Ilara nodded, her frustration simmering beneath the surface. "You don't have much time." As she turned to leave, her mind raced. She had made the first move, but the Aelari were not ready to accept the reality she was offering. They were proud, and their pride might be their downfall. Outside, the city looked even more desolate than before. The disease had spread far, and now it seemed to seep into everything. The streets, the buildings, even the air itself. Ilara couldn't afford to wait. If the Aelari wouldn't act, she would have to find a way to force their hand. But how? She wasn't sure, but she couldn't let them die without a fight. As the wind whispered through the broken streets, Ilara made a silent promise to herself. She would save them, even if they didn't want to be saved. Days passed in a blur of meetings, tense discussions, and failed attempts to convince the Aelari leaders to take action. Ilara had hoped that her words would spark some kind of revolution within their society, but instead they clung to their traditions as though they were sacred relics, unable or unwilling to adapt to the crisis that loomed over them. Every effort she made to get them to acknowledge the deeper, systemic problems went unanswered, met with polite resistance or outright dismissal. Frustration gnawed at her. She knew the disease was not just a result of biology. It was a consequence of their overuse of the planet's resources, their dependence on a form of technology that was both advanced and dangerously unsustainable. She had tried everything she could think of to persuade them to listen, but their pride was a wall she couldn't breach. That night, after another unsuccessful meeting with the council, Ilara sat alone in her quarters, the dim light from the crystal lanterns casting long shadows across the walls. Her mind was racing. There had to be something, anything, that would make them see reason. She had already exhausted the data on the plague's genetic mutations, and even though she had discovered several potential treatments, none of them would work in the long run if they didn't address the root cause, the imbalance between their technology and their environment. In desperation, Ilara turned to the Aelari archives, a vast network of ancient knowledge stored in the city's central repository. She'd heard rumors of lost technologies, forgotten practices from their ancestors that could hold the key to healing the planet. If nothing else, it might give her the leverage she needed to get the Aelari to take action. The archives were hidden deep beneath the city, accessible only to those with the highest clearance. Ilara had no official access, but her status as the human healer gave her a rare privilege. She had already encountered more than one closed door, but her persistence had won her some allies among the younger generation of Aelari. They were more open to change, more willing to consider that their civilization's future might require something drastic. A young Aelari woman named Lyra had become her most reliable contact. Lyra's eyes, pale violet and filled with curiosity, had softened whenever Ilara spoke of the disease and its devastating effects. Unlike most of her elders, Lyra seemed to understand that survival required more than just preserving the status quo. That evening, Lyra met Ilara in the depths of the archives, where towering shelves of crystalline data cubes hummed softly in the low light. The air was heavy with the scent of ancient scrolls, their fragile edges yellowed with age. "There are things down here, buried," Lyra said, her voice barely a whisper. "Things our leaders don't want us to know. Ancient texts, forbidden knowledge. I've been searching for answers, and I think I found something." Ilara followed Lyra through a narrow corridor lined with rows of forgotten relics. At the end of the passage, they reached a door marked with symbols Ilara didn't recognize. Lyra hesitated, glancing over her shoulder to make sure they weren't being watched. She inserted a small crystal into the door's lock, and with a soft hiss, the door slid open. Inside was a room bathed in dim, golden light. At the center, a large stone pedestal held a glowing crystal that pulsed with an otherworldly energy. It wasn't just any artifact. It was a remnant of the Ilari's ancient past, one that had been sealed away for centuries. This, Lyra said, is the heart of the first cycle, the key to our origins, the one thing our ancestors left behind when they abandoned their first home. Ilara stared at the glowing crystal, feeling an inexplicable pull toward it. The heart of the first cycle. What could it mean? She had heard vague references to the Ilari's original planet, the one they had fled from long before they colonized this one. Their ancestors had built this new world from the ground up, but they had also abandoned something. A mistake, a failure, a dark secret. What does it do? Ilara asked, stepping closer. Lyra's voice dropped to a murmur. It's said to be a source of healing energy, something far beyond anything we've understood, but it comes with a warning. Those who tried to use it in the past, they destroyed their world. Ilara's heart skipped a beat. Destroyed their world. Yes, Lyra said softly. Our ancestors tried to harness its power to heal their dying planet, but they used it recklessly, without understanding its true nature. It's more than just a source of energy. It's a living force, bound to the planet itself. They tried to control it, and it reacted, wiping out everything. Ilara absorbed this in stunned silence. The energy, the one she had sensed in the Ilari's legends, was something they had once worshipped. It had been seen as a gift, one that could heal and provide abundance. But it was also a force that could tear everything apart if misused. Lyra took a deep breath. The legends say that it can heal, but only if it is accepted, not controlled. It's the balance that was lost when our ancestors left their old world behind. The implications of Lyra's words hit Ilara like a punch to the gut. Could this be the answer they needed? A source of immense power, capable of restoring the balance to their planet. But there was a catch, a deadly one. If the Ilari tried to use it the way they had used their technology, the planet would be doomed once again. We need to tell the leaders, Ilara said, her voice urgent. This might be our last chance to save your world. But Lyra's expression darkened. We can't. They'll never believe it. If they find out we've been hiding this, if they learn what happened to our ancestors, they'll turn on us. Ilara's mind raced. The Ilari's history was far more complicated than she had realized. And now she had discovered the one thing that could save them, or destroy them all. The weight of the discovery pressed heavily on Ilara's shoulders. The heart of the first cycle was more than just a relic. It was the key to their survival, but it also carried the potential to obliterate everything. The Ilari's ancient history, long buried beneath layers of pride and tradition, was slowly revealing itself, and with it, a dangerous truth. The very thing that could heal their planet had been the cause of its destruction once before. As Lyra turned to face Ilara, the gravity of their situation hung in the air like a storm cloud, threatening to break at any moment. You understand now, Lyra said quietly, why our elders would never allow this knowledge to come to light. They fear that what happened to our ancestors will happen again, and they will never allow their civilization to be brought low. Ilara nodded grimly. The parallels were undeniable. The Ilari's ancestors had used their world's power to cure their planet's sickness, but in doing so, they had brought about its death. Now, their descendants, bound by the same fear, seemed determined to deny any possibility of repeating their ancestors' mistake. The heart of the first cycle, though seemingly the answer, was both a blessing and a curse. But Ilara couldn't shake the thought that perhaps this time could be different. She had spent years studying the human condition, healing the unhealable, and she knew that understanding the balance between nature, technology, and life was the key to survival. The Ilari had relied too heavily on one aspect of their planet, and now the cost was clear. They needed to find a way to use the heart, not as a weapon, but as a tool, one that could restore the equilibrium between their world and the people who inhabited it. What if the key to using the heart isn't just accepting its power, but understanding its true nature? Ilara asked, her voice laced with uncertainty, but also determination. Maybe we don't need to control it, but rather work with it, respect it, not bend it to our will." Lyra looked at her, searching her face as though trying to gauge whether Ilara truly understood the depth of what she was proposing. "And you believe the elders will listen to that? They've built their lives around a narrative of survival through control. They will never accept your approach." Ilara clenched her fists, frustration rising within her. She didn't have time to convince everyone. If she waited for the Aelari's leadership to come to their senses, they might lose their last opportunity to save their civilization. "We don't have a choice. If we don't do something soon, your people will die, and your world will crumble under the weight of its own destruction." Lyra's gaze softened, but doubt still lingered in her eyes. "Then you'll have to go against everything they've built. It won't be easy. You'll be seen as an outsider, someone threatening to unravel centuries of belief." "I've been an outsider before," Ilara muttered. "I've been told that I couldn't save people, that I couldn't fix what was broken. But I've never walked away from a challenge, and I won't start now." With resolve hardening within her, Ilara turned toward the glowing crystal at the center of the room. The heart of the first cycle pulsed with energy, its soft light casting long shadows that seemed to stretch across the room, as if it were alive. She couldn't deny the pull it had on her, a deep primal attraction to its power. But she knew she had to resist it. The true strength didn't lie in the crystal itself, but in what they could learn from it, and how they could use it in harmony with the world they were trying to save. "You said it was a gift," Ilara continued. "But it's more than that, isn't it? It's a test." Lyra nodded slowly. "Yes, a test of balance. Our ancestors were too eager to use it, too desperate to solve their problems without understanding the consequences. They were blinded by their own ambition. But you see it differently." Ilara turned back to face Lyra. "We have to show them the truth. The Aelari need to understand that their civilization's survival depends on more than just their technology. They have to heal their world, not exploit it." Lyra sighed, looking at the heart with both awe and fear. "And if they don't listen?" "If they don't," Ilara replied, her voice hardening, "then it's up to us to act." The decision was made. Ilara couldn't wait any longer. She couldn't risk losing what remained of the Aelari people to their own hubris. But she also knew that her plan would put her at odds with the very society she was trying to save. The path ahead was uncertain, and the stakes were higher than ever. But as Ilara stood in that dim-lit chamber, facing the heart of the first cycle, she felt something stir within her, a sense of purpose, a belief that she was meant to be here, to heal this dying world. And for the first time since she had arrived, she believed that it was possible. Lyra met her gaze, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and fear. "You understand what you're about to do?" Ilara nodded. "I do, and I'm ready." Together, they turned toward the heart, knowing that they were about to challenge the very foundation of the Aelari's existence, and the consequences of that choice could either save or destroy them all. Ilara's heart pounded in her chest as she stepped away from the heart of the first cycle, the strange energy it emanated still buzzing in the air. Lyra had already begun to gather what little information they could find, deciphering old texts and fragmented scrolls about the heart's origins and its power. Time was quickly running out, and Ilara knew she had to act fast. The Aelari were losing ground every day, the disease spreading faster than anyone had predicted. They needed a solution, and it had to come from the heart. But first, she needed to make them believe. She needed to convince the leaders, the elders, and the skeptics who were still clinging to their old ways that the heart was not just a relic of the past, it was the future. A future they could only have if they were willing to let go of their misguided fear. The next day, Ilara found herself once again standing before the Aelari Council. This time, however, she wasn't alone. Lyra had agreed to back her, and together they would present their findings. The council chamber was tense, the leaders seated in their elaborate crystalline thrones, their eyes focused on the two women. Thal, the elder healer, sat at the center, his expression unreadable as always. The rest of the council seemed more divided than ever. "I have heard your words before, human," Thal said, his voice deep and unyielding. "You have no new evidence. You have no new answers, and yet you insist on challenging centuries of tradition. Do you truly believe that we, the Elari, are wrong?" Ilara held his gaze, refusing to back down. "I believe that your traditions are holding you back, that they've caused the very crisis you now face. You need to rethink everything, your technology, your cities, and your relationship with your world. And above all, you need to understand the heart of the first cycle. It's not a threat. It's the only chance you have left." The room was silent, all eyes on her. The Elari were a proud people, their culture built on an unshakable foundation of history and reverence for their ancestors. The idea of questioning that foundation was blasphemous. To Ilara's surprise, it was Lyra who spoke up first, her voice steady and firm. "Thal, the heart is not what you think it is. It's not just a power source to control. It's a living force, a force that connects us to the planet itself. It can heal, but only if we stop trying to dominate it. It's about balance, not control." Thal's eyes flicked to Lyra, a flicker of doubt crossing his features, but he quickly masked it. "And what makes you think that you, a young one with no real understanding of the consequences, can speak for all Elari?" Lyra didn't flinch. "What makes you think that your way of doing things, your way of trying to control everything, will work any better? The disease is spreading because you've been blind to the true nature of the heart. It's not about technology. It's about understanding the forces that shape us and learning to live in harmony with them." Ilara could feel the shift in the room. The other council members were murmuring to one another, some nodding in agreement, others looking skeptical but intrigued. The seed of doubt had been planted. Thal, however, seemed resolute, though Ilara could see a flicker of concern in his eyes. "Enough," Thal said, raising a hand. "You speak of balance, but you have no way of ensuring that this balance will not destroy us all again. How do you know we will not fall into the same trap as our ancestors?" Ilara's mind raced, trying to find the right words to convey the urgency of their situation. "I don't have all the answers, but what I do know is that your planet is dying, and if you don't take action, it will be too late. I've seen enough to know that we can't keep going down this path. We've wasted enough time already." The tension in the room thickened as Ilara's words hung in the air. For a moment, it seemed as if the council would reject her outright, but then, as if in a moment of silent understanding, Thal lowered his gaze. He took a deep breath, and for the first time, Ilara saw a flicker of something she hadn't expected: regret. "We have been blind," he said quietly, almost to himself. "We have relied too heavily on what we know, and in doing so, we have ignored what the heart truly represents. But how do we begin again? How do we trust that this will not lead to disaster?" Ilara stepped forward, her voice filled with urgency. "We begin by accepting the unknown. We must embrace the possibility of change, not fear it. If we try to control the heart, we will destroy ourselves. But if we approach it with respect, with a willingness to learn and adapt, we might just be able to save this world." There was a long pause. The Elari leaders deep in thought. Ilara knew she couldn't afford to wait much longer. Every minute, every hour that passed without action was another nail in the coffin of their civilization. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Thal spoke again. "We will consider your proposal," he said, his voice grave but not dismissive. "But you must understand, human, that the decision cannot be made lightly. The fate of our people is in our hands. We will not act recklessly." Ilara nodded, her heart pounding. It wasn't a victory yet, but it was a step forward. She knew that now she had to work even harder. The real battle had only just begun, and the future of the Elari rested in their willingness to change, willingness to take a leap of faith that they might be able to restore the balance their ancestors had lost. As she left the council chamber, Ilara couldn't help but feel that this was the turning point, the moment when the tide could finally shift. Whether the Aelari would act on that belief was yet to be seen, but for the first time, she felt a glimmer of hope. The council's deliberations stretched for days, and Ilara could feel the tension mounting throughout the city. The Aelari population, once proud and stoic, now moved through the crystalline streets like shadows of themselves. Their desperation was palpable, their fear growing as the disease continued to claim more lives. Rumors swirled about what had transpired in the council chamber, about the human healer's audacious proposal to use the forbidden heart of the first cycle. Ilara spent the days refining her plan, but time was slipping through her fingers. Lyra remained by her side, her presence a steadfast source of strength. They pored over ancient texts, deciphering every fragment they could about the heart's power and its relationship with the planet. The picture that emerged was one of complexity. The heart was not a tool to be wielded, but a symbiotic force that required understanding, humility, and cooperation. But as they worked, a troubling realization began to take shape. The council's hesitation was not just rooted in fear, it was also rooted in control. Thal and the other elders weren't merely cautious, they were protecting their grip on power. To acknowledge the heart's true potential would mean admitting the failure of their traditions, and that was something they were unwilling to do. Lyra's frustration boiled over one evening as they sat in the dim glow of the research chamber. "They'll never act," she said, slamming her fist against the table. "They're too blinded by their pride. They'd rather watch the world die than admit they've been wrong." Ilara looked up from the scroll she was studying, her expression grim. "Then we can't wait for them. If they won't act, we have to." Lyra's eyes widened. "You're talking about going against the council. That's treason, Ilara. If we're caught, they'll exile us. Or worse." "I know," Ilara said quietly. "But what choice do we have? Every day we wait, more people die. More of your world crumbles. We can't afford to stand by and do nothing." Lyra hesitated, fear flickering in her eyes. But then she nodded. "If we're going to do this, we'll need help. There are others who've lost faith in the council. Healers, scientists, even some of the guards. We can't do this alone." The plan took shape quickly. Ilara and Lyra began reaching out to those they trusted, quietly gathering a small group of Aelari who were willing to risk everything to save their world. It was a diverse group. Healers who had seen too much suffering, engineers disillusioned by the council's inaction, and even a few guards who had grown tired of enforcing a system that was failing their people. One of the guards, a grizzled veteran named Kale, approached Ilara during one of their secret meetings. "You're putting yourself in great danger, human," he said, his voice low but steady. "Why are you doing this? Why risk your life for a people that aren't your own?" Ilara met his gaze, her expression unwavering. "Because I'm a healer. It doesn't matter whose lives are at stake. If I can save them, I will. And because I believe your people are worth saving. You have the potential to thrive again, to build something better than what you've lost. But only if we act now." Kale studied her for a moment, then nodded. "You've got courage. I'll give you that. I'll help you. But you need to understand, if this goes wrong, the council won't just punish you. They'll come after all of us." "I know," Ilara said, "and I'm ready to take that risk." As the group prepared to make their move, Ilara felt a mix of fear and determination. The plan was audacious. Infiltrate the ancient sanctuary where the heart of the first cycle was kept, activate its power, and use it to stabilize the planet's dying ecosystem. It was a gamble, one that could either save the Aelari or doom them entirely. But Ilara knew they had no other choice. The night before the operation, Lyra approached her, a flicker of doubt in her eyes. "What if this doesn't work? What if we're wrong, and we only make things worse?" Ilara placed a hand on Lyra's shoulder, her voice calm but firm. "Then at least we'll have tried. At least we won't have stood by and watched as everything fell apart. Sometimes, Lyra, the only way to heal is to take a leap of faith." As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, Elara and her group moved into action. The sanctuary loomed ahead, its crystalline spires glowing faintly in the morning light. The air was heavy with anticipation, every step bringing them closer to the moment of truth. Elara's heart raced as they approached the heart's chamber. This was it, the point of no return. Whatever happened next would shape the future of the Elari, for better or worse. And as the chamber doors creaked open, revealing the glowing heart of the first cycle, she knew there was no turning back. The chamber of the heart of the first cycle radiated an ethereal glow, its pulsating light casting intricate shadows across the crystalline walls. Elara felt a pull toward the heart, a force that seemed to reach into her very core. The air was thick with energy, alive and humming with an ancient power that defied comprehension. Her team stood behind her, their expressions a mix of awe and trepidation. Lyra stepped forward cautiously, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is it, the heart. It's even more powerful than I imagined." Elara nodded, her gaze fixed on the crystalline structure at the center of the room. It looked alive, its surface shifting and shimmering like liquid light. The ancient texts described it as a living force, connected to the planet's very essence. But its power had been dormant for centuries, sealed away by the Elari's fear of repeating the mistakes of the past. Kale, the grizzled guard who had joined their cause, approached Elara with a grim expression. "The council will know we're here soon enough. We don't have much time." Elara took a deep breath, steeling herself. "Then we'd better not waste it." She turned to Lyra, who was carrying a small device they had cobbled together from fragments of ancient technology and modern ingenuity. It was designed to interface with the heart, to channel its energy in a controlled way that would restore balance to the planet's ecosystem without overwhelming it. But the device was untested, and the risks were immense. "Elara," Lyra said hesitantly, "if we activate this and it doesn't work." Elara cut her off. "We don't have a choice, Lyra. We've come too far to turn back now. If we do nothing, your planet dies. We have to believe this will work." Lyra nodded, though the fear in her eyes was unmistakable. She approached the heart cautiously, the device in her hands trembling slightly. As she connected it to the crystalline structure, the room seemed to come alive. The light from the heart intensified, filling the chamber with a dazzling brilliance. The hum of energy grew louder, resonating deep within their bones. Elara stepped closer, her hand resting on Lyra's shoulder. "You're doing great. Just stay focused." The device began to emit a low, steady pulse, syncing with the rhythm of the heart. For a moment, it seemed as though everything was going according to plan. The heart's energy flowed through the device, its power radiating outward in waves that seemed to soothe the air itself. The ground beneath their feet trembled slightly, but it was a gentle, almost reassuring vibration. But then, something shifted. The light from the heart flickered, and the energy flowing through the device began to spike erratically. Lyra's eyes widened in panic. "Something's wrong. The heart is resisting. It's unstable." Elara rushed to her side, examining the device. "It's not the heart. It's us. We're trying to control it too much. It's fighting back because we're not letting it work the way it's supposed to." Kale stepped forward, his voice urgent. "What do we do? If this thing blows, we're all dead." Elara's mind raced. She remembered the ancient texts, the warnings about balance and harmony. The Elari ancestors had failed because they tried to dominate the heart's power, forcing it to bend to their will. If they were going to succeed, they had to do the opposite. They had to trust it. "Disconnect the device," Elara said suddenly. Lyra froze. "What?" "Elara, if we disconnect it, we lose control. It could destroy everything." "No," Elara said firmly. "The heart doesn't need us to control it. It needs us to let it do what it was meant to do. We have to trust it." Lyra hesitated, but the conviction in Elara's voice was unshakable. With trembling hands, she reached for the device and disconnected it. The energy flow stopped abruptly, and for a moment, The chamber fell silent. Then the heart began to pulse again, its light growing brighter and more intense than ever before. The room was filled with a deafening hum as the heart unleashed its full power. The ground trembled violently, and a surge of energy swept through the chamber, knocking them all to the floor. Ilara shielded her eyes from the blinding light, her heart pounding as she felt the raw force of the heart's power washing over her. When the light finally dimmed, the chamber was transformed. The crystalline walls shimmered with a vibrant, otherworldly glow, and the air felt alive with energy. The heart pulsed steadily, its light soft and soothing now. The tremors beneath their feet had ceased, replaced by a calm stillness that seemed to radiate outward. Ilara pushed herself to her feet, her legs shaky but steady. She turned to Lyra, who was staring at the heart in awe. "It worked," Lyra whispered. "The heart. It's healing." Kale let out a low whistle, his usual stoic demeanor momentarily giving way to wonder. "I don't know what just happened, but I'll take it." Ilara allowed herself a small, relieved smile. "We didn't force it. We let it do what it was meant to do, and it chose to save your world." But the moment of triumph was short-lived. The sound of footsteps echoed from the corridor outside the chamber. The council guards had arrived, and they did not look pleased. Ilara exchanged a glance with Lyra and Kale. The battle wasn't over yet. The heavy footfalls of the council guards echoed through the corridor, growing louder with every second. Ilara, Lyra, and Kale exchanged tense glances as the reality of their situation set in. The heart of the first cycle pulsed gently behind them, its energy now stabilizing and spreading outward, a quiet testament to the hope they had reignited. But that hope was fragile, and the arrival of the guards threatened to shatter it. "They're coming," Kale muttered, his hand instinctively moving to the hilt of his weapon. "We won't have much time to explain." "No fighting," Ilara said firmly, stepping in front of him. "We can't risk a confrontation. Not here. The heart's energy is still volatile. We'll talk to them, make them understand." Lyra hesitated, her eyes darting toward the chamber's entrance. "The council won't listen. They'll see this as a betrayal, treason. We've defied their authority." "We'll make them listen," Ilara said, her voice unwavering. "This isn't about us or them. It's about saving your people. If they can't see that, we'll show them." The chamber doors burst open, and a dozen armored guards stormed in, weapons drawn. Behind them strode Thal, his face a mask of fury. He stopped at the threshold, his piercing gaze sweeping the room before locking onto Ilara. "What have you done?" Thal demanded, his voice thunderous. "You've tampered with forces beyond your comprehension. Do you have any idea what you've risked?" Ilara stepped forward, her chin held high. "We've risked everything because you wouldn't. While you debated and delayed, your people were dying. The heart wasn't meant to be locked away. It was meant to heal. And it's doing that now." Thal's eyes narrowed. "You presume to know better than the council, better than centuries of tradition. You've unleashed a power that could destroy us all." "No," Lyra interjected, her voice trembling but resolute. "We've unleashed a power that's saving us. Look around you, Thal. The heart is stable. The planet is stabilizing. The tremors have stopped. The disease is retreating. The heart isn't our enemy. It's our salvation." The other council members had arrived, drawn by the commotion. They stood in the doorway, their expressions a mixture of shock and curiosity as they took in the sight of the glowing heart and the calm that now suffused the chamber. Ilara turned to address them all. "Your world was dying because you refused to see the truth. The heart of the first cycle isn't something to be feared. It's something to be respected, to be nurtured. Your ancestors tried to control it, and they failed. But that doesn't mean you have to repeat their mistakes. You can learn from them. You can rebuild, not just your world, but your way of life." Thal's expression softened, doubt flickering across his face. He stepped closer to the heart, his hand outstretched as if to feel its energy. The anger in his eyes gave way to wonder, and for the first time, he seemed truly uncertain. "It feels alive," he murmured, "like the planet itself is speaking." "It is," Ilara said gently. "The heart is a part of your world, just as you are. If you treat it as an enemy, it will resist. But if you treat it as an ally, it will help you." The council members murmured among themselves, their fear slowly giving way to hope. One by one, they stepped forward, their skepticism melting as they felt the heart's gentle pulse. Even Thal, who had been the most adamant in his opposition, seemed to waver. Finally, he turned to Ilara. "You've defied our laws and our traditions, but you may have saved us. Perhaps we were wrong to seal the heart away. Perhaps it is time to forge a new path." Ilara nodded, relief flooding through her. "It's not too late. Your world can heal, but it will take time. It will take all of you working together, not just to rebuild, but to create something better." The guards lowered their weapons, and the tension in the chamber dissolved. Lyra stepped forward, her voice steady as she addressed the council. "We have to do this together. The heart can't fix everything on its own. We need to change, to let go of the fear and pride that have held us back." Thal sighed heavily, the weight of his years etched into his face. "You're right. Change is never easy, but it is necessary. We will honor the heart, not as a relic of the past, but as a guide to the future." The council members nodded in agreement, and for the first time, Ilara saw unity in their faces. She felt a surge of hope, not just for the Aelari, but for the possibilities that lay ahead. As the council began to organize a plan for rebuilding, Ilara stepped back, watching as the Aelari took their first steps toward a new future. Lyra joined her, a smile breaking through the exhaustion on her face. "You did it," Lyra said. "You changed their minds." "No," Ilara replied. "We did it. All of us. And now, it's up to you to make sure this change lasts." Lyra nodded, determination gleaming in her eyes. "We will. I promise." Ilara looked back at the heart of the first cycle, its light steady and strong. She knew her part in this story was over, but the Aelari's story was just beginning. With the heart as their guide, and the lessons of the past to steer them, they had a chance to create a future worth fighting for. As Ilara left the chamber, the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon, bathing the crystalline city in golden light. It was a new day, and for the first time, it felt like a beginning, not an end.